In the race to adopt new technology, many organizations are moving faster than ever before. But in the world of customer experience, speed alone doesn't always equal success. Today's guest challenges us to think about what he calls the value versus velocity paradox, the tension between moving quickly and delivering meaningful outcomes. Because whilst AI, automation, and digital transformation promise efficiency, the real question is whether they're actually creating better experiences for customers and employees. Neil Frandsen has spent decades helping organizations navigate exactly that challenge. As Managing Director of Yaxxa, he works with businesses across New Zealand and beyond to design contact centers and CX strategies that balance innovation with practicality, ensuring technology serves people, not the other way around. Neil brings a thoughtful perspective on leadership, partnership, and the role technology should really play in transforming service. Welcome to the Kiwi CX Collective podcast, Neil Frandsen. Welcome, Neil.
Thank you very much, Elias. Really appreciate it and super excited to be on the Kiwi CX Collective podcast. As always, it's an absolute pleasure to partner with you in any way that I can from my side. And really appreciate the opportunity to have a chat with the audience.
Absolutely. And obviously, I'm going to start off with this question. We talk about the value versus velocity paradox. What is your definition of value versus velocity?
Well, if we look at velocity, obviously it's how quickly you can deploy or implement or affect change. And then from a value perspective, you're looking at effectively the measurable improvement that you're achieving from that change. If you look at it from a CX perspective, value would be how quickly you can resolve an issue, and velocity would be how quickly you would resolve an issue, and then value, the quality and effectiveness of that resolution.
Well, obviously, when we talk about that there is this value we're trying to give, and there's this velocity we want to, and contact centers have this legacy, I guess, of average handling time, so people trying to get rid of somebody within a certain time frame. So what tensions are you actually seeing in the marketplace right now?
Look, I think it really does vary from industry to industry and dependent on what you're looking to achieve, because there's varying degrees of deployment across specifically AI and other solutions in the CX space. But for me, probably one of the biggest tensions is how rapid deployment can outpace clarity, all right? And organizations launching projects before they have clear defined objectives would probably add to that loss of clarity through the project at the end of the day. When it comes to AI, so it is a different kettle of fish, and I think we've just got to remember that AI is an amplifier. It's not a strategy. So you need a solid strategy to put the AI amplifier or tool on top of it. In regards to this, though, I do see this space being more supported by the products. The more productized the AI solutions become, the easier it does become to deploy them, and the more the tool itself will support you in those processes.
Well, let's focus then, as you point out, on this CX investment, because we want that customer experience to be a good experience. And yet we're seeing technology accelerating at a phenomenal pace. So how does value versus velocity translate to CX?
Well, absolutely. So, I mean, velocity at the end of the day is going to reduce effort, right? And value is going to deliver quality resolutions. So velocity without value effectively results in inconsistent outcomes. And value without velocity can cause frustration to your customer at the end of the day. The good news, though, is that if you do find a good balance of the two, you end up with trust and loyalty across the board.
trust, loyalty, they are words that resonate with me. And if I think about what's happening within the contact center industry, especially here in New Zealand, but also overseas, we're seeing a lot of people jumping on the bandwagon. There is this need to sometimes keep up with the Joneses. I know one of my other guests was talking about the impact of your AI implementations and the fact that once you commit to it, you can't turn the key and drag it all back, especially if it's going into a public domain. So why do you think so many organizations are actually prioritizing speed over depth, over making sure they do the right insights into how they're going to implement this and why they're going to implement it?
Look, I would say there's a handful of reasons with regards to this. So first of all, speed is visible. It feels decisive and it signals progress. All right. So velocity is attractive, and not only from that perspective, it's also attractive on a balance sheet for obvious reasons. From a resource perspective as well, there's windows that get allocated for technology projects. So whether it's a ERP upgrade or a CRM migration, maybe platform changes. And the trick is with regards to AI, and we'll discuss this a little bit more as we go, because I think it's one of the critical elements of AI deployment and implementation, is that it needs to be a phased approach, which kind of bucks the trend with regards to how digital support teams are supporting the business and how they manage their windows where they're delivering these technologies in.
So, there's a risk of confusing activity with progress. How would you guide your clients to understand that risk and mitigate it?
Well, I suppose that the best way to answer this is just to make mention of one of my favorite responses to this point, is that you can automate a broken workflow and effectively make it fail a hell of a lot faster. And that's where the fun starts, all right? So there is risk involved in it, but you can mitigate much of the risk through good, solid planning.
Well, if you look at good solid planning, I think it's going to be important for us. So let's go and segue into talking about AI. So often AI is positioned as the solution to everything. But in reality, I think what you're telling me is that it's an amplifier rather than a strategy. As you say, you can speed up that broken process and have it happen quicker. So what do you mean by that? Well, what's happening when organizations automate processes that weren't well designed in the first place?
Well, absolutely. I mean, look, AI doesn't fix processes, right? It amplifies whatever is there, quite simply. So you could end up with the result where you are scaling problems. And again, I truly believe that the solution to this is to start with clear, well-designed workflows. The AI can then enhance those using speed, consistency, visibility, and yeah, pretty much just ensure that the foundation is there, because it will amplify whatever good or bad exists.
So we're hearing a lot more. We just recorded a series of podcasts around the COPC research. It's New Zealand centric. So we are asking our members and users here in New Zealand, how are you using technology, process and people? And we're finding that AI is starting to get much more traction. It always has had within the contact center industry. So we can look at it from looking at sentiment analysis. We can look at it in wrap-up codes. We can look at it for quality assurance and that sort of training element. And there's many, many more. So how do organizations determine the right level of AI to introduce without overcomplicating workflows or creating unnecessary costs?
Absolutely. From a cost perspective, there's a couple of aspects with regards to that. So you've got to look at the cost of implementation, and then again, the cost of putting the wrong implementation in place. We all know that there's many different areas that this could affect, but effectively through circling back to the phased approach again, when you're working in phases, that brings the value into the process. Okay. So when we're talking about collecting data, refining solutions, verifying adoption, and absolutely validating the outcomes, identifying the next best step is effectively the best path to follow. So making assumptions early on what the full architecture is going to look like is probably would result in shortcomings. If you do plan too far ahead, then you do risk having to run rollbacks, put directional changes in place, running new solution designs to patch areas that or oversights that have now become apparent. The bottom line for me is just to be patient while generating the data you need to make an informed the next best decision on informed information. Yeah.
Well, look, let's then talk about how we can encourage people to take the right leadership approach, because I think leadership and strategy becomes a core tenet of how we successfully deploy this sort of opportunity. We mentioned before keeping up with the Joneses, and that's so easy for us to hear. Well, everybody's doing it. It's a lot of anecdotal information out in the marketplace. I guess the question I want to ask is, how do leaders avoid adopting technology just simply because the market says that they should?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's tough not to keep up with the Joneses right now, right? Because it's attractive, it looks sexy, and it promises a lot. So it's easy to get swept up in it. But at the end of the day, there's some very simple questions to ask that we've all known for a very long time, before implementing any type of project or technology. And it's simply ask the question, what problem is this solving? Okay. If you haven't got that answer, you're not ready to implement. So if you have reviewed other use cases, I think it's also important to assess the metrics that are being used to deliver the data of the outcomes. So those outcomes ultimately is what you want to achieve, whether, like we mentioned, faster resolution times, or agent confidence, or any of those aspects. You need to understand how that use case arrived at those outcomes. Because again, that velocity versus balance. So if that use case, the success is pinned to velocity, it might not suit your use case where your success is pinned to value. All right. And then, the last question that you've got to ask yourself is basically, will this technology strengthen our capability at the end of the day? Yes or no? And if so, by how much?
Well, let's go back and unpack that a little bit more. We're talking about what is the problem that we're trying to solve. So this goes back to something I heard back in about 2018, 2019. We had an international convention here in New Zealand. One of our guest speakers came over from Canada, Annette Pause, and she asked us a question. She said, what is the size of the problem you're trying to solve? So let's say you're solving a $100 problem. Why would you put $1,000 into solving a $100 problem? If the problem isn't big enough, we shouldn't be investing in technology to try and crack it. It's got to be appropriate. It's got to be adding value, and it takes a requirement of analysis, which is what I'm hearing you saying loud and clear. So you've mentioned some of the questions that leadership teams should be asking before they introduce AI to their organization. So what other questions do you think that leadership teams should be asking?
I think there's a lot, and it does depend on what you're trying to achieve, right? I think it's good to look. So you've got your standard requirements that basically your outcomes that you're trying to achieve. Sorry. So, again, is it the improved wait times, agent confidence, first contact resolution? Define that and how we're going to achieve that. I suppose from a technology standpoint, you also need to ask, can we evolve this technology moving forward? How can we influence it in the future? Can this grow with us? A big one is, do we build or do we buy? And this last point, I think, is pretty important. So I had a discussion with somebody last week, and they had built an incredibly successful AI bot, and it's been running and achieving all the objectives and meeting all the metrics. And it suffered a couple of issues and effectively required maintenance. But since building the bot, that resource is no longer available within the organization to maintain that bot. So they've actually scrapped it, and they've now identified that they need to find something that's effectively from a provider or off the shelf, where they could worry about their core responsibilities as opposed to becoming a developer in their own right. For us, we're aggregators by nature. And I think with regards to AI, still at this point, you probably need to look at it from an aggregation perspective. And the main reason being is that we all know it's not if, it's when the next best technology coming out. And you want to be able to be adaptable to plug in or plug out of those, should you wish to do so. So effectively trying to avoid that AI tax that may come through as well.
So again, plug in, plug out, that comes back to what I've often seen and heard other guests talk about in terms of siloed implementations. So you've got multiple divisions within an organization. You've got legacy systems that we're starting to see and find coming in. How do we address this? How do we overcome the limitations, the obstacles in front of us? And then if you think about the whole GDPR issue in terms of data protection and privacy. And we've seen situations where deployments have gone offshore, and you go to, for example, the Philippines or India, just to name a couple of destinations. If your data is compromised there through an outsourced partnership or through the hosting of data, that is a real issue. Just talked to Qantas recently to see the impact it's had on them. What else do you see, and where do you see most transformation efforts going wrong?
Look, I think, and we have covered this, but it is essentially the core of it. Not defining your outcomes, but thoroughly defining them. It's not. It's understanding what it means to your customer, your agent, your business across the board, not just one aspect of that. I think the definition of the ROI also dictates your balance of your value versus velocity. Okay, so what is the higher weighting? Is it saving time and money, or is it producing quality outcomes? Where does that sit? And when you look at that question of transformation, it's also important to understand the different parties that are coming to the table. So I know, and I have seen in the market, that most providers are defining ROI in terms of time and money. Okay, so it can create a disconnect from the get-go and effectively start the project on the wrong foot, because the business and the provider are effectively speaking two different languages at the end of the day. I know that sounds a bit dramatic, but it's important to, if you can define your outcomes and what's important to you from an ROI perspective, you can then communicate that to your provider and ensure that they're on the same page as you.
Well, that's going to be important because, again, you're referencing the elements that we should be asking ourselves as leaders in this industry. Are we trying to reduce our costs and speed up the speed to answer, etc.? And for sure, we're seeing that automation will help us, and AI is an element of that automation. But ultimately, We're being left now with more complex calls that often require a human intervention and are more likely than not going to be based on a voice type call. So we're seeing the shift come back into an empathetic call with an agent. So if you then look at the role, what role does a provider play in helping that leadership team turn that strategy into practical outcomes?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, ultimately, your provider is going to be the conduit between the technology and the business. Okay. So, taking your defined outcomes and then translating that into deliverables from a technology standpoint. I would think that that's probably the most important role for the provider to play at that point. I mean, I'm sure you've experienced as well with regards to providers and how they work with your team at the end of the day is often a deciding point on which technology provider you're going to go with.
So let me then pause that conversation at that point, because we can talk about providers, and providers are different, I think, to partners. So if I look at the concept of partnership versus provider, what is the difference between a technology provider and a true partner in your eyes?
Yeah. See, now you speaking my love language at the moment. So, I did have a discussion about this the other day, but I think for me, a partner you see interacting with your business even when things are running smoothly, right? It's not just somebody that comes in when there's a problem. So quite simply, a provider puts fires out and a partner prevents fires from starting. I suppose you could put it that way. It's somebody that engages with all of your users, not just the leadership team or specific stakeholders. And at the end of the day, you know, if we start looking at post-deployment that's of concern to a provider, they look to become an extension of your help desk. They're also concerned about system evolution, evolving workflows, and influencing, allowing the customer to influence their roadmap.
Okay, so what does roadmap influence actually matter? Does it matter?
Yeah, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, who is the tool being built for, right? It's not for us as a provider. It's the people that matter is the end users ultimately. So it does, involving the customer in your roadmap adds a lot of value to your organization as well. So effectively, that forms part of our CI/CD strategies, right? It also forms part of the future-proofing initiatives that we run within the business. And it adds longevity to the relationships that we hold. I have discussed in the past as well, we haven't been first to market with a lot of technologies, okay? And velocity would have dictated that we should have been launching products when all of the hype was starting, okay? But the route that we opted for was to effectively identify what's going to offer the most value to our clients, which are the best tools to be able to deliver that. And another element is finding the right partners to work with at the end of the day to build those solutions, you know. And fortunately with us as a locally owned platform and supported platform, you know, roadmap influence becomes a very tangible and real thing, because whatever it is that your team's requesting, there's opportunity to be able to put that out, to make that available to them.
So I love the concept of a set of users who are influencing the design that is cross-functional. It's also across demographics. and you're saying not only in the organization, but also externally, getting your clients and customers involved. Because I think it's important to understand, what do they expect out of this technology? How will it help improve the deployment of this going forward? I heard of a great example when I was in China attending the Hong Kong Contact Center Association symposium, and COPC put a case study in front that says, well, they deployed it from a retail perspective to then throw a new product into the mix, but totally forgot that, the type of interactions, who gets involved at what point, if there is the need for escalation, that there is understanding of how that works and how that operates, so that people can resolve the problem properly. So it comes back down to one of the first guests that we had on the Kiwi CX Collective podcast, who talked to us about AI and AI governance. And we talked about the importance of having accountability, having somebody who sticks up their hand and says, yeah, I'm responsible for this. So when we think about accountability, and I'm so passionate about accountability, how important is local accountability in a rapidly evolving tech landscape?
Look, it's massive, right? Because a lot of frustration gets built up when there is a lack of accountability, So I think from a technology perspective, people are looking for faster decisions for us. I know being a local provider, we are able to offer shorter feedback loops, and it certainly creates an environment of transparency, right? So, if I had to give an example, so there's an issue on a platform or a piece of technology, and you log a ticket with the provider, and you follow up for an update, and they advise that the resolution is coming, and then eventually the resolution does come through. And then, dependent on the severity of the incident, whether it requires a root cause analysis or not, would depend on how large the incident may be or how regularly it occurs. But once it's come back through the chain, just the fact that it's been resolved is enough for the value add from the provider side. And in some instances, it's the full extent of the capability on what they can offer you, in the sense of understanding what it is that resolved that. Now, sometimes another ticket has to be logged to ask that question of what is it, what was the root cause of the issue. Whereas if you're dealing directly with local providers, you get that shorter feedback loop, and you get those responses that are obviously aligned with the issue, but B comes in the accountability piece. To be able to stand up and acknowledge that this issue is a direct result of any action or inaction that we've taken, I think is a responsibility at the end of the day. Not necessarily just trying to present it so that it's digestible for the customer. And I'll tell you why that's a priority for us, is that there are instances where it is possible that those issues can reoccur, all right? And that transparency offers a bit of a window that, yes, hang on, guys, we still need to keep an eye on this thing. Everything's not peaches and cream, we need to manage it, and let's manage it together, And I do find that customers are very receptive to working with you on things, as long as they're in the know and it's transparent.
So it comes back to our conversation just a little earlier on about the difference between partnership and provider. So sometimes I get this feeling when I'm dealing with organizations that I'm just like another account number, I don't know. It's almost like you've got to have that partnership to go from provider to true partnership. So what happens when a business feels like they're just another account number?
I know it's terrible, and we all experience it, right? There's some instances where it's unavoidable, but I suppose if I had to get a sense that my customers were feeling that way, I would know that I'm losing the battle, right? if there are any areas where that does happen, or any other issues that I need to rectify, it's never too late to fix anything. So my advice is always just address it. But there is regularly, actually, myself or one of my team go out across the country, and we actually sit with all of the users that are on our system. I arrived at one of our clients, and as I got off the plane, rented the car, went through. It was based up in Leuven, and I arrived, and my contact there said, "Hey Neil, I knew you were coming, but I didn't know what you wanted to do, so I haven't booked a boardroom. Do you want me to do that?" And I just said, "Look, I actually haven't come to see you. I've come to see your users. You and I talk all the time, but I never really get to sit with them." So the point being, though, is that when sitting with the users, is that there actually can be a high level of apathy across the users with the technology, for a couple of reasons. The core reasons would be they have mentioned it 2 or 3 times already and they've given up now, or there have been 2 or 3 other instances, so they don't see any value in mentioning this new issue that could have cropped up. And value at the end of the day, apathy at the end of the day, is directly responsible for a loss of trust, ultimately, circling back to your favorite there, Elias. So I think ensuring that your customer doesn't feel like you're just a sounding board that's, viewing them not only as an account number, but maybe a PO number, it could even be as bad as that. But just ensuring that you are there for them. I'm not sure if that answers your question. I think I might have strayed there a bit.
No, I think we're just having a conversation here at the end of the day,
Yeah.
and there's no right, there's no wrong answer. I think that's the paradox of what we're talking about here. There's a value versus a velocity paradox that we started this conversation with. So if I go back and look at this, we do need to understand the value. We need to have a defined outcome of implementing these technology pieces, and the velocity in which we deliver them is partially based on the velocity of what you wanted to do within the organization, as well as the speed of what you're going to do in terms of implementing it. And there has to be, I think, the AI reality check. When do we position AI? Is it the right lot? Do we in-house it? Do we partner with others to provide? Are there legacy systems that we can integrate into this, or do we come with a complete new framework that comes and does it all for us? But we've got to, I still think that everything rises and falls on leadership. And the leadership and the strategy becomes the most important element. I love what you're talking about that takes us into a mixture between partnerships and providers. And I think we've got to understand that the partnership is the one that is proactive, like you coming in to your organization and your client and saying, let me talk to the end users. Let me see what they're doing. Let's understand and learn from them, because often it's people on the front line within the contact centers who have the voice of customer, who understand the issues and the challenges, and often have the best ideas of what we need to do to improve things and implement it. Look, Neil, I'm sure we could continue a conversation for quite a bit longer, but I know we have to draw every one of these podcast episodes to a conclusion. So let me ask you to think for our audience and say, how would you summarize the challenges of this velocity versus value paradox that we're talking about, and what are the key takeaways that you'd like our audience to walk away with?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I think but it is very exciting, and I think as far as AI and the technology is concerned, for us, understanding it innately, and then being able to offer, steady guidance on that is important. But as far as value and velocity is concerned, I think it's just to ensure that you understand all of the elements of the process before going ahead with anything, making sure that you've asked the questions that are important, specifically, what outcomes are we trying to achieve? What value is this going to add to the organization, to the users, to the leadership group, to the customers, of course. And when looking at the technologies, a lot of them from an AI perspective specifically do come wrapped up together. So you've got an AI platform that can do a wide range of things. When that happens, you need to just pick the one that you think is going to provide the low-hanging fruit, or the easiest win from an ROI perspective. That will also help you cut your teeth in that space, understand how all of the elements are working together between the LLM, the transcriptions, the voice agent, the chat agent, the email agent. The list just keeps going on. So just whittle it down to one thing to start with. Explore that, gain experience in deploying that, and then you can then tackle, cross the next bridge, as it were. But I think also just have fun with it. Go out in the market, have conversations. There's a lot of people in our industry that are just excited to share, the new and exciting tools and information that we've got, and use that information to be able to drive your decisions moving forward. But the bottom line is, for me, is let the data help you make informed decisions. We've already got a lot of data. We can use that data to drive, motivations towards adopting new technologies. And then as those new technologies are implemented, use that data to influence your next step.
Fantastic. I think you're spot on there. We do have a lot of data, and we do need to analyze that properly to drive the right decisions for investment and improvements in the organization. Look, Neil, as we wrap up this particular episode of the Kiwi CX Collective podcast, if any of members of our audience wants to get hold of you, what's the best way to get hold of Neil Frandsen from Yaxxa?
Yeah, absolutely. So please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn. You can also reach me on my email, which is neil, Neil, @yaxxa.co.nz. And it would be lovely to have a chat.
Awesome. Look, I'm sure that people will reach out and continue a conversation with you. Again, on behalf of CCNNZ, I would like to thank you for appearing as one of our guests on the Kiwi CX Collective podcast. Neil Frandsen from Yaxxa. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Elias. Really appreciate it.